Since Trump returned to office, headlines about historic and unprecedented events in the drug war and everything else have come fast and furious. From the US designating drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations to Mexico handing over a total of 92 presumed cartel operatives to the United States, to the downfall of El Mencho, the most wanted criminal leader in the country, who was killed last month during an operation by Mexican armed forces in Tapalpa, Jalisco. How much of this signals we are witnessing a new era in the history of the drug war? What is truly unprecedented and what is deja vu? I'm Kathleen Bonet, and my guest today is historian and professor Benjamin T. Smith, author of The Dope, The Real History of the Mexican Drug Trade, which is essential reading and a go-to reference for understanding the historical context behind the news cycle today. Welcome to the MexPat interview, Ben.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
So it didn't take long for 2026 to bring a dramatic drug war development with the death of El Mencho on February 22nd. And I'd like to talk to you about both the policy implications and the fallout on the ground. So let's start with security policy. This operation inevitably brings the kingpin strategy back into the conversation, which both AMLO and Sheinbaum had disavowed. And at least rhetorically, the president is trying to distance herself from it. And you've described this strategy as big show, all blowback, no beneficial effects. So can you provide some recent history first of this strategy and then any differences you see in the Sheinbaum-Harfuch approach today?
Yeah, certainly. Well, first of all, I should warn your readers that I certainly won't, or listeners, that I certainly won't be as eloquent as that particular quote seems to indicate. So, I mean, essentially, the kingpin strategy is something that the DEA kind of comes up with on the hoof during 1990s to combat Pablo Escobar. Now, in all honesty, we now know that Pablo Escobar is a very unusual narcotics leader in that he did have a fair amount of control over cocaine production in Colombia and also had an inordinate amount of political power. We now know that in actual fact, so-called kingpins don't really exist, or not in the way that the DEA has portrayed them. So this model has been, or this model of policing has been replicated throughout Latin America and particularly in Mexico. And I'm sure some of your more clued up, genned up listeners will remember some of them. The most famous recent kind of kingpin that was arrested was El Mayo. We've had El Chapo before him. Before him there was head of the Gulf Cartel. We've had Lascano, who was the head of the Zetas, who was murdered. I mean, we can go back over history, back to Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, the head of the Guadalajara cartel. In actual fact, I remember when the pre-president, so Peña Nieto, came to power, he claimed, rather like Sheinbaum and AMLO, that he was going to do away with the kingpin strategy. He was no longer going to allow this. However, then he mistakenly, stroke on purpose, let Chapo go and was forced by the Americans to clamp down yet again on the drug trade. And in that time, I think he put 150, now he termed them kingpins. Not all of them were kings, but most of them were at the court of the kings, let's say. So you've 150 odd people in prison claiming they were kind of high up members of these drug cartels. And two things happened. One, the amount of heroin going into the United States didn't waver. In actual fact, the price on the street went down. And two, within a couple of years, I think 130 of them had been released. So pardon me if I think this is a completely bankrupt strategy. In actual fact, and I mean, the extraordinary thing about Trump, and I remember I was listening to the particular economist, thinker, political scientist who was talking about Trump, and he said the thing about Trump and people even like Bannon around him is the first half of what they say is actually pretty good critique, right? I mean, they're probably right about the bankruptcy of the liberal economic agenda. They're right that most of their supporters are poor and miserable and don't have healthcare and live in the Midwest, right? The problem is their solutions are rubbish. So, and it's rather like that. I mean, the Trump government has critiqued very, very acutely the kingpin strategy. So the ambassador under Trump one, a chap called Landau, who's still in the Trump administration, he was heavily critical of the kingpin strategy, thought this showed the complete bankruptcy of DEA kind of thinking, and in actual fact, I suspect pushed the Trump administration to rely much more heavily on the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security than the DEA during that period. But I mean, just like Trump said there would be no more forever wars, and then decided to start a war against Iran. He also claimed there would be no more kind of pointless kingpin captures that blew up whole regions of Mexico, and then did another kingpin capture. So again, it would appear that the Trump administration is just doing what every other administration has done since Bush won.
Right. I mean, the previous kingpin capture was under the Biden administration with El Mayo, right? So, which, by the way, was, of course, quite a different operation than this one, which was led by Mexican forces and they said with US intelligence, and of course has not, at least at this point in time, and it's still early, it's only been a month, it hasn't set off the intra-cartel violence yet, at least on a large scale. Unlike what happened in Sinaloa, which we now have this ongoing civil war within the Sinaloa cartel because of the internal betrayal, right? Coming back to El Mencho specifically, do you see this as Sheinbaum seizing an opportunity more than changing strategy, or simply reacting to pressure from the US?
I think it's. I mean, my guess is once the CIA comes to you and say we've been tracking Mencho's girlfriend, we know where he's going to be living. Then it's very, very well. In actual fact, we do have precedent for this. There were quite a few occasions when the Americans had very good intel over where Chapo was, and the military would go in, and it became the joke in the DEA that there wasn't a Spanish word for to surround, because he always seemed to kind of escape just before they got there, or escape round the back of the particular place that they had allegedly cordoned off. So I think once the Americans come with kind of information, it's very difficult for any administration not to do this. I mean, yes, a little bit of pressure to a certain extent, but also it looks good from our overall security strategy, which I think certainly people in the West seem to forget is entirely focused on making sure that Mexico is not utterly chaotic by the time of the World Cup in a few months' time.
Right. Which, I mean, yeah, I think that this probably would not have even been an option if they didn't have intelligence indicating that actually the immediate fallout would not be so dire. So, last week, the Wall Street Journal reported that Juan Carlos Valencia Gonzalez, El Mencho's stepson, is taking over, who has been kind of considered one of the top contenders for the throne. But what do you think we'll see in the medium term as the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación regroups?
Well, it does appear that because they haven't, I mean, a lot of these kingpin takeouts, I mean, I think there are kind of two things that's worth saying here. The first is, I think always the assumption was that after you took out a kingpin or a leader, then there was going to be some huge, I mean, you've made the analogy yourself, and it's a very natural kind of analogy because that's the metaphor that they've established, that all the courtiers try and fight over the throne, right? I don't think that's true. I think the vast majority of the violence that is caused by taking down a kingpin is not about everyone fighting over the throne, right? It's about people working out to hold on. There are people in our organization that have betrayed us. Now, in the case of Mayo, it was very visible who the person who betrayed them was. In other cases, it's not necessary, right? In this case, now, not fortuitously, if you are the woman who was caught going to see El Mencho, or I'm guessing also the entirety of that woman's family, that I don't hold enormous amount of hope for either. We don't have a kind of visible, there isn't a kind of visible group or person that betrayed El Mencho. So as a result, I mean, I think it's quite clear why there isn't going to be huge amounts of violence. I mean, the other thing I'd like to question as well is the idea that this is a kind of throne. I mean, there is no doubt that to a certain extent that Gonzalez kind of Valencia will have control over certain elements of Cartel Jalisco strategy, but these organizations are way more decentered than people think. And they were also hugely reliant. I mean, they are effectively kind of two operations that are almost distinct nowadays. There's the one operation which is let's go and get some drugs into the United States. Now that involves huge amounts of technical know-how, scientific know-how. It also involves, it's a transnational operation where you basically need to know who in the Chinese administration you can corrupt. to get pharmaceutical grade fentanyl out of China or out of India and into Mexico. And then you need you need at least some kind of competent chemists to do it. Then you need some half decent smugglers up at the border in order to do it. That's one operation, which no doubt they have
Hmm.
some people involved in, right? And we know that some of Menschel's family are pretty good, particularly at the kind of finances of that. The so-called Queenies, they used to be called, which is a kind of
Hmm.
particular branch of his family. But the other operation of the Cartel Jalisco is basically it's a parallel government, it's a shadow government that runs pretty much everywhere from Jalisco down to Guerrero. I now know it's in Oaxaca. It's got elements in what it's in. Got certainly got groups in Chiapas,
Yeah.
and basically is involved in extorting every illicit business, of which there are lots that Mexicans don't like to talk about or people don't like to talk about. So I'm talking sex trafficking, illegal logging, illegal mining, growing of weed, obviously, as well, which is still grown, some opium poppies, but then also vast swathes of licit industries as well. I mean, the most famous being, notably the most famous are the ones that have money, so avocados and limes, but
Right.
also taco
Yeah.
stall owners and chicken farmers. So, and that
Hmm.
shadow government, and it seems to me that's what Mencher was head of. He was a kind of terrifying head of something that relies on terror
Hmm.
in order to extract money. I don't think, honestly, that Mencher had a clue about who in the Chinese government you had to pay off to get fentanyl. My guess is all he was doing was taking a percentage of their profit,
Hmm.
right? I mean, the guy, everyone starts off with their biography
Hmm.
of the Mensch,
Hmm.
Menschel going, well, he was done for kind of drug dealing, and he was done for minor heroin dealing in, the kind of thing that is basically done by people who are addicts up in the United States. It's totally low level. Where did he start? He started as a policeman,
Hmm.
and that's what he's
Yeah.
good at. He's good at doing what every Mexican policeman has done for history, which is extorting criminals. And that's what he's good at. And that's what really the Cartel
Hmm.
Jalisco is. It is a vast shadow government, somewhat funded by some clever wonks who know how to make fentanyl. So,
Hmm.
sorry, I'm not
Hmm.
I'm completely off topic.
So, I
I have
mean,
been
it's
kind of thinking about, when we talk
no, no, no.
when we talk about kingpins, these are terms we like to think these are integrated corporations, but they're not. They're quite separate, and they've got separate people involved.
Hmm. So, but getting back a little bit to actually the family aspect of this, there are a lot of family connections across these organized crime groups. In Sinaloa, we have, as I mentioned, this ongoing conflict within the cartel. And last year, there, were some predictions that maybe the cartel wouldn't even survive this conflict, but it has, despite the the ongoing rift. So, why do you think it's held on? Why hasn't it been taken out completely by other groups like the CJNG, for example?
Basically, because it's integrated, I'm trying to think now, 5, 6 generations in Sinaloa society. I mean,
Hmm.
I think simply the tale of how El Mayo was caught is kind of both mind blowing, but also talks to the way that it is so completely integrated. So El Mayo, for your listeners who maybe don't know, was kidnapped by one of Chapo's sons, but the way that they managed to kidnap Mayo was set up a meeting at which he was going to give his opinion on who would be the next rector of the Sinaloa University. And he was going to go meet the governor and the former rector of the Sinaloa University. The former rector was shot in the head, a guy called Melicio Cuen, who was, maybe your listeners won't know this, the son of, or maybe, no, actually, no, sorry, the grandson of one of the first opium producers in Sinaloa in the 90s, who also called Melicio Cuen. So it's a bit like, thinking, they haven't even. Okay, so the first thing is it's really, really integrated. Now let's think of another place where they did actually where organized crime was massively integrated into the community. Well, that would be Sicily. Well, Sicily, what it did do,
Sicily.
yeah, in the 90s was a massive public maxi trial, but for all its problems and all its inefficiencies and all the fact that it didn't get all the bad guys, did for once basically show the Sicilian people, these are your enemies. These are the people who are different from you.
Hmm.
And without a kind of
Hmm.
open judicial system, I think it's completely impossible
Yeah.
to disaggregate these groups from the general populace. Because at some level, they are the rector of your university. and they're certainly the mayor of your town. And unless you say these
Right.
people are all part of that group, let's do them on some kind of RICO law or some kind of you're all members of this group and put them all on trial and show them these people can be corralled and judicially decided on by the state, nothing's going to happen. It's still going to be there in your community.
Right. And now with this acceleration of handing over these presumed cartel operatives to the United States, which had obviously been going on for a while, but now it's happening on a whole other scale. There seems to be even more exporting, essentially, of the judicial process north instead of it being carried out here in Mexico.
Yes, yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, why have they sent 90 people? I mean, the sending of the 90 odd people north is these people mean nothing, right? I mean, you could send hundreds of them. I mean, they don't mean anything to the cartels themselves. Some of them are, I mean, was it Caro Quintero is like 75 or something and has been sent up there. I mean, he just should be taking
Yes.
pension, right? So I mean, these people are not important operatives. This is not going to kind of actually destroy the workings of the cartel, if at all, and it certainly won't suck the money from them. But you're right, all it does is basically mean that Mexico doesn't have to sort out two fundamental underlying problems, which is the judicial system, which allows almost complete impunity, and the prison system, which allows the wealthy to live in splendor there and also often quite literally walk out of prison because of they brought the guards or because they've managed to play the judicial system. So yeah,
Right.
it's
Right.
really bad.
Right. No, go ahead. You can
And no, I
interrupt you.
completely agree with you. It's extremely bad for a Mexican government that does not need to sort this out and seems spectacular. Well, I mean, what people will tell you who are close to both AMLO and Claudia Sheinbaum, who have managed, and if we're going to come back to maybe the non-security aspect, I mean, I think they have done some fairly impressive things in their time in power. But both of them are absolutely terrified by security, the judicial system, and what to do about kind of everyday crime, and neither of them have a clue how to fix it, basically. Which is why both have basically used the military to do so, or the Americans.
Well, and I think, though, that it is worth drawing a distinction between what AMLO did during his term and what's happening so far with Sheinbaum. And there are, of course, external factors to that with Trump's return to office, though also worth remembering that he was in office during AMLO's term as well. So it's not that is a unique situation in some ways that Sheinbaum is dealing with. I think she also campaigned on making a bigger dent in the security problem. And with her security chief, with Omar Garcia Harfuch, that she wanted to implement basically the strategy that they had created for Mexico City, which is supposed to rely on more intelligence, more coordination, and more effective policing, essentially. Though, as you say, they're relying on the National Guard and the military to carry a lot of these things out, at least, out in provincia, right?
Yeah, Harfuch has established his own new federal police, right? I mean, using the old federal police because there was nothing against them. They didn't get basically entirely fired because they suspected around 98% of them were on the take. So I'm sure this can't go wrong.
No, I'm sure. So I guess the distinction I wanted to draw is that AMLO did seem to pull back in pretty significant ways, and one of them being, of course, the infamous Culiacanazo and letting Ovidio Guzman go to avoid further bloodshed in that instance. And, Sheinbaum has also made way more arrests so far than during AMLO's term, if you compare them. So there has been a shift in the strategy. And I guess one of the more recent things that just happened that indicates perhaps an even further distancing from AMLO in security strategy is Garcia Harfuch meeting with the DEA Administrator Terrence Cole in Washington. And that definitely raised some eyebrows on this side of the border. What do you see the message as being sent with this?
Well, it's exactly the same message. I mean, again, sorry to be the historian here to repeat the talking heads line, same as it ever was, same as it ever was. In the 1990s, the DEA said, "Don't worry, Mexico's going to be fine. We've got this brilliant police officer. His name's Gonzalez Calderone. He's in charge of the federal cops. He'll take everyone down." 1993, Gonzalez Calderone ran away to the US, saying, "Yeah, I was basically massively corrupt," and then gets shot in a Texas the Texas car park in 2001, I think it was. We then had Garcia Luna. He was a super cop. He was incorruptible. He was absolutely brilliant. The DEA met him, and he's now in jail in New York. Or he was put
Mhm.
in jail in New York. I think he's probably now in Colorado with all the others. And now we've got Garcia Harfuch, who is meant to be the new savior. Now, I'm sure some of your listeners will know this, but Garcia Harfuch has a very interesting background. His grandfather was cacique of the state of Jalisco, the state where the Cartel Jalisco comes from. He was also at least, let's call it, adjacent to the 1968 massacre of students. Maybe wasn't the guy who ordered it, but he wasn't a million miles away from that. Garcia Harfuch's
Mhm.
father was a guy called Garcia Paniaguas, who was head of the DFS, which was the Secret Service. He was in charge in 1977, which was the exact year the DFS started to employ Guadalajara cartel hitmen to take out leftists. Garcia Harfuch's half-brother was also a relatively famous drug trafficker who was taken out by other drug traffickers. Now, miraculously, Omar Garcia Harfuch, however, is incorruptible. He is not only the one member of his incredibly politically important, politically well-linked family that is incorruptible, but he has used none of those links in order to get to his position of head of the public security. Now, excuse me if I don't believe that. I believe that he's exactly like all
Mhm.
the federal cops who come beforehand. Now, what he is very good at is getting relatively close to certain cartels and using information from them, but also the protection of them to take out other cartels. There were loads of rumors when he was
Mm.
operating, and this is the reason that was given why the Jalisco cartel had tried to have him killed in, I think it was 2020, 2021, was that he was basically using information
Wow.
from the Sinaloa cartel to take out rather high up members of the cartel Jalisco. This is what he does. That's what policing is in Mexico. In
Mm.
terms of, yes, there have been more arrests. My question is, what are they doing with these people? The prisons are also already full.
Mhm.
The judicial
Mhm.
system already doesn't work. I mean, there's a fundamental problem that half the people in prison haven't been tried yet. Here's another
Mhm.
100,000 who aren't going to get tried. Right. So until they improve the judicial system, this is pointless. They have, it would appear, brought the murder rate down. I think the figure they gave was they brought the murder rate down 42% in the last 14 months, which, if so, is kind of extraordinary. But I think two things, and I'm sure this is being discussed in certain areas of the Mexican media, although not as much as it should be. One, okay, it looks like also things like suicides and accidental deaths have gone up in this period. So have they just been moving people from the column that says murder to accidental death? That was always the accusation that what Garcia Harfuch was doing in Mexico City. And the second thing is, and talking to people working with NGOs and with indigenous groups in kind of Michoacan, Guerrero, Veracruz, have local federal authorities come to agreements with cartels and said, do your violence, but make sure you bury them in unmarked graves. Is this decline in homicides being paralleled by a massive increase in disappearances? And it would appear that
Mm.
some areas of the countries, the kind of semi-institutional way that you found disappearances, which was basically the mothers of the disappeared, who would go around poking
Mhm.
metal sticks into the ground in places that the cartels told them to. The agreements between them and the cartels appears to have broken down. I think it was last year about 4 of them got whacked by the cartels for poking around in areas they weren't meant to. So I am not so hopeful that there has been a radical change in the last year or so under Claudia Sheinbaum. The one thing I will say, and this is, I think, the reason why the political or the media elite in Mexico City are supportive of Garcia Harfuch in a way that kind of beggars belief. I'm always very surprised. I mean, the people who are supportive of him, they know Garcia Luna, they know Gonzalez Calderoni. What I'm telling you is not news to them. They know all these people and how they pleased, right? So I think why he is supported so much is that he's seen to be an important counterweight to the increasing power of the military, which Sheinbaum and AMLO are very worried about. So I think
Mhm.
this is why
Mhm.
there is the support for Garcia Harfuch, despite the fact everyone knows that he's exactly like every other super cop. Sorry if that's rather
Interesting.
cynical.
No, no, I think it's a really important perspective to maintain, again, with a historical lens on this because, everyone seems to have very short memories, very increasingly short.
Yeah.
So, I think that, yes, as far as the homicide statistics go, there is a lot of debate about this. It doesn't seem quite as simple as, disappearances are going up in an equivalent measure to homicides going down. So I do think that it appears there has been a reduction. Like you say, it's hard to say how significant it actually is in reality, but it does appear to be happening or going in that direction.
I don't know if you've looked at there's been a very interesting investigation done by I think it's Noroeste, the Sinaloa newspaper, where they did start to do an
Mm,
investigation on an area, and I think it's North Sinaloa, where there had been a lot of
hmm
homicides connected to the fallout from the Maya arrest, and it did seem to indicate that there was a kind of parallel increase in disappearances, and they had some people who were prepared to admit that's what they were being told to do. Now, whether
mm, yeah.
I mean, the other thing is this an agreement with the government if you start to disappear people more? I mean, possibly not. Maybe you just think we've got a government which is about to prep for a World Cup. If we start dropping bodies all over a street, they'll probably come for us.
hmm
If we bury them in the mountain over there, they probably won't. So it's not
Right,
necessarily this
right.
is an overt agreement.
hmm
It's a kind of
Yeah,
covert
exactly.
understanding.
What is the biggest myth that you would like to see dispelled about the history of the drug war?
The history of the drug war itself. Okay, so the history.
In Mex-
Yeah.
yes, in Mexico. We'll narrow it down.
Yeah, that it okay, here we go. That it can ever be won. That in any way, shape, or form. I mean, I still don't really understand what even in a pure world where whole swathes of both U.S. and we can come back to this, but also U.S. and Mexican institutions are corrupted by drug money. Even in that world, even if that wasn't that world, even if everyone was just doing their job without being corrupted by drug money, I don't see how it could be won. So effectively, the theory of the drug war is you take, let's say, you find 20 tons of cocaine. Now, and the idea is, well, that takes 20 tons of cocaine off the street. But in actual fact, what it does is it increases the price of cocaine because there's less cocaine on the street. Well, if cocaine's pricier, then you've basically incentivized a load of people who wouldn't take the risk of trafficking cocaine to traffic cocaine.
hmm
Cocaine is now worth double the price that it used to be. So even in its kind of purest form, the war on drugs, the idea that you take drugs off the street and that in some way stops people taking it in another place, it just doesn't work. But I mean,
Yeah.
that's just the kind of base irony of the drug war. There are plenty that they've layered one on top of the other.
Right. Yes. Over now a long period of time
Well,
here.
100 years. I mean, I suppose the other thing I'd like, and I've been thinking quite a lot about this, and I'm kind of writing a bit about it as well, in that there is a brilliant American historian, a guy called David Hertzberg, who's been looking at the drug war in the last over 100 years, and also a guy Matthew Lasseter. And their argument is the following: is that the drug war is incredibly kind of brutal and nasty to people right at the bottom, the users, the small smugglers, the mules, and these people do get punished, and they got punished, for example, in the United States during the 1980s and 90s, where we had mass incarceration, right? But the flip side to this is that encased within all of this rhetoric that drugs are bad and just say no, there is massive impunity for the vast majority of people who take narcotics. Every banker who takes coke, every university student who smokes weed in the United Kingdom where it's still illegal, or takes a bump of speed or whatever, or MDMA at a party, they do drugs and they don't get any of the war on drugs. They don't get prosecuted. Even if they got
hmm
caught by the police, they'd be allowed out with an easy sentence. They wouldn't go to jail. They get busted 3 times with taking MDMA. They wouldn't go to jail for the rest of their lives.
Right.
You're black, or you're brown, or you're poor, or you come from a foreign country. So the war on drugs it's a kind of horrendously brutal sorting mechanism for the modern world. I think of it more like in some
Mm.
ways like a witch craze. It has no connection in a way to drugs themselves. It's simply connected to the disciplining and prosecution of the working class. And again, sorry to be both
Mm.
depressing and also sound quite Marxist.
Don't apologize. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on how fentanyl affects this dynamic as an extremely potent drug that does kill a lot more people who use it than others have. Though we are now seeing that starting to decline in the US, the overdose rate seems to be going down. The move from plant-based drugs to synthetics has, of course, really impacted how they're trafficked, who the traffickers are actually, and but also on the user side, on the drug user side, it's changed quite a bit. How do you think that shifts this as far as the public health response, and what could be a better response?
Right. Okay. So there are kind of two questions there. One, what has it done in Mexico, right? So what has the fentanyl industry done? Well, myself and a guy called Roman Lacour Gramazon and Nat Morris, we did an investigation. We were kind of there in the countryside, well, particularly Nat and Roman were there during what we termed the last harvest. So around kind of 2019, as fentanyl was started to be take over, most of the price that you would get per kilo of opium gum that you made from poppies that you grew on your land had gone down by about, I think we worked out, had gone down by about 4/5 or something like that. Basically, it was no longer profitable for people to grow opium anymore. So you're right, it's taken a whole swathe of the kind of rural population out of drug production. What has this done? It's sent loads of them to the cities, and it's sent loads of them to the border. So it's basically created a massive hole in the peasant economy. So that's, one thing that it's done there. What has it done with the kind of leadership? You're right. I mean, Chapo and Mayo are last of a generation. I mean, Chapo, there was some extraordinary stuff coming out in the trial where he's negotiating with local peasants who haven't given him the amount of marijuana he wanted. So he kind of goes, "Nah, I know that guy. I knew his dad. It's fine. Don't worry." Right. Well, that kind of relationship with your kind of producers that has kind of disappeared. It's made the industry massively transnational, but this is something that is not discussed. Where are those chemicals coming from? There was that one very, very useful, and I still use it, the Insight Crime investigation. They found out lots of it comes from Germany. Some of it comes from India, quite a bit comes from China. But these people don't see, or these governments don't seem to be held to account. I mean, it's somewhat interesting. I always think that so Peru and Bolivia get their fields sprayed for growing coca, but I haven't seen, I'm not seeing bombs getting dropped on Indian pharma companies for producing the stuff that kills hundreds of thousands of Americans, right? Even though that is the raw product out of which the drug comes, right? Again, the war on drugs makes no logical, ethical, or moral sense, but yeah, so it certainly has changed things. I mean, you can see this so many levels. I mean, it always amuses me. I don't know if you've ever listened to the kind of new brand of music coming out of Sinaloa in the early 2020s, like trapteño, like a mixture of norteño music and southern trap music. And like every trapteño song would have some kind of shady Chinese character in the background. And you're always like, well, why is he there? And then you realize he's the one who's actually getting them hold of these chemicals, right? I mean, he's actually really, really crucial to all of this.
Yeah.
My guess is that Culiacan's richest young sons are learning Mandarin. They're going off to Hong Kong. They're going off to Shanghai. I mean, yes, things are changing. I mean, the geography is changing as well. It's the big ports that are really crucial. Getting the stuff in the big ports, making deals with the military generals who control those big ports. That's the really kind of crucial payoff you may need to make. Control of borders actually less important now because you don't need to get a car rammed full of cocaine over the border. You just need to get in a Coke can full of fentanyl to make your money. So it can. I mean, the only reason that controlling the border is useful is because you can sell drugs because you've got a large addict population the south side of the border now, which is pretty important. I mean, what's it done on the US side? You're right. I mean, thank God fentanyl overdoses are going down. Now, is that on the Mexicans? Is that health reduction schemes, which has been introduced in certain cities in the US with a fair amount of success? And I don't want to do any disservice to them. I think they're incredibly important. Is it, however, that the Mexicans are learning not to make it quite so potent and that this killing off your entire whatever user base is not entirely sensible? Or is it that America's disenfranchised, deindustrialized, unemployed, depressed, mostly male working class a lot of them have killed them, have died over the last kind of 5 years? Are we running out
Right.
of that particular age group and group of people? I mean, in about a 5-year period, about
Mm.
500,000 of them did die of overdoses or suicides. So yeah, I mean, it's depressing, but I think it probably also has something to do with it.
hmm What do you think this next era is going to look like in the shorter term here? We have this continued escalation of rhetoric on the U.S. side. I mean, I actually thought it would get more attention, even though I know it's Stephen Miller, but
Sure.
he said there is no criminal justice solution to the drug cartels at the Shield of the Americas conference. So, you have that on the one hand, right? And then you have what Mexico is trying to negotiate, essentially, as far as maintaining its sovereignty to some degree, and these shifts that you just mentioned, as far as a more transnational sort of drug trade. So, give us an idea, paint a picture of what could be coming in the next year or so with this evolution.
God, you get a historian to make your predictions. That's probably a very bad thing.
Yes. Well, I think they're the best. They're the best ones.
Garcia Harfuch will become president in about 3 years' time, and then we'll be and then we'll be found in a series of rolling corruption scandals. No, I'm being somewhat flippant there. Although I don't think that's entirely impossible that he will be. I mean, I think it's fairly clear that he has a lot of people and bots supporting him for a presidential bid next time around, which I think would be insanity. Do I think that America is going to launch a kind of bearded Delta Squad kind of raid somewhere deep inside? I honestly, frankly doubt it. I mean, you have to normally build up a kingpin before you launch a massive military raid. I'm sure the pressure will be ongoing. But I mean, one thing that we really have learned from the Trump administration is I'll be fair, it's Mussolini fascism. It's not Hitler fascism.
Mm.
When push comes to shove, it backs off. It's
Mhm.
back out of Iran. It's backed off ICE. It backed off going after agricultural workers as soon as it was told by the farmers, "You'll ruin us if you do this." And it's going to back off because Mexico's a massive trading partner. You just can't do this kind of thing. So I mean, there might be some. I don't know. Maybe he'll send in, take out one person or something like that, and
Mhm.
harm
Mhm.
a load of innocent civilians, and be utterly unsympathetic and stupid about it. But as soon as he faces up to the fact that, I mean, very key for him is that the stock market will collapse if you do this, then he'll back out. Who ever thought
Yeah.
that civilization would rest on a massively overpriced um, stock market, and the fact that everyone's got their pensions in it?
Who would have thought? Thank you so much for this conversation. I really appreciate it.
And
And as always, it's fascinating to hear your perspective. And I highly recommend that listeners check out your book. And yes, do you have any other books in the works at the moment?
yeah, I do. I'm just finishing a book called Queen Pin: How One Woman Ran the Border Drug Trade, which is like the Dope Part Two, but I'm trying to make it
Oh,
less about drugs and more about what it's like living as a woman at the border. So who better to tell you than a white man from the Midlands in the UK?
excellent. I very much look forward to reading it. Yes. And thank you again. And listeners, please do check out The Mex Patriot if you want to stay on top of the national conversation.